am Daniel Leakus, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today, I have my special guest. He is the author of upcoming fantasy novel, New Role, no other than Mr. Richard Sparks. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Richard. And can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Richard Sparks. Thank you very much for having me, Daniel. I'm the author of New Rock, New Role, R-O-L-E, which is the first book in my New Rock series. I've written 4 so far. I'm working on the 5th at the moment. And the first one is published on December the 12th, 2023, and the others will be rolled out over subsequent years, months, I suppose. They've been a lot of fun. They arrived out of my love of role-playing games on the internet. So that's where the idea hit me on the head like an anvil one day. And since I had it, I haven't stopped writing, haven't signed on to play a single minute of a game since. I'm too busy exploring my own strange new world.
Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Richard, you came from the UK and then you moved to the US.
That is correct. I was born in England, actually in London, although we moved out when I was a couple of months old. I'm the same generation as, for example, Douglas Adams. He was a friend of mine. He was at Cambridge University the same time I was at Oxford. So we met doing university student reviews, and he had other people in his year like Simon Jones from Hitchhiker, Jeff McGiven, Mary Allen, Griff Rhys-Jones, who went on to become a great comic star in England and writer. I had Peter Wilson, who sadly just died, eminent West End producer, and Mel Smith, who was a comedian on Not the 9 O'Clock News, a show I wrote for. And he went on to do a show with Griff called Alas, Smith and Jones. It was a staple of British television back in the old days. And so after university, I went to work for Welsh television for a couple of years, and then came back to London with some credits under my belt. And my first thing that was of any note was I wrote a sketch for Rowan Atkinson, who's completely unknown at the time. And it was at a very small review, just him, Peter Wilson, and Elspeth Walker. And I wrote a sketch in which Rowan comes on stage dressed as a schoolmaster and reads a list of funny names and does a sketch. John Cleese saw it, and Martin Lewis, who was the other producer of The Secret Policeman's Ball. And a year later, Rowan called me up and said, John Cleese just rang. He saw the show. He wants me to be in his new charity show. And can we do the schoolmaster? And I said, you bet. So we went down to the theatre to meet. Rowan was a complete unknown at this time. And having worked with him, seeing how brilliant he was, it was quite obvious that he was going to go far. And he's had the most amazing career. So we went to meet John Cleese, and there was Peter Cook and Billy Connolly and Pete Townsend of The Who and all sorts of people milling around. And it was one of the difference between a funny writer, which I'm a writer of funny stuff, and a funny person is Rowan introduced me to John Cleese, who looked down at me from about 9 foot high and extended a hand and said, your face looks vaguely familiar. And off the top of my head, I came back with quite a good remark at the time, which was, well, I can usually pick it out 9 times out of 10 in a not too crowded mirror. And John Cleese's laugh at my little joke made me laugh more than my joke made him laugh, because he's a funny character. Like, Rowan is a funny person when they put their mind to it. They're just different from normal people or even comedy writers. And that was a great thing. And then Rowan went off on stage an unknown and came off a star, and has gone on to do everything ever since. All the Blackadder and Johnny English and Mr. Bean, of course. So magic.
He's become phenomenal.
I've had a little association with him back in the old days, just like Douglas and I put together something called Doctor Who when Douglas was working on it. It was so bad that, even we knew it wasn't worth sending into. I think he might have been a script editor. But just, it's like, I think we showed it to someone. They said, oh, well, they did this story 2 years ago. And we thought, oh, well, this is not for us. We had the same agent in London, Jill Foster, who handled some of the Monty Pythons, like Graham Chapman, Michael Palin, Terry Jones, Marty. Well, that's before my time. Marty Feldman, other good writers, Gail Renard. Plenty of Tim Brooke Taylor. Just a little boutique agency, and so I was sort of thereabouts at the time.
I love Monty Python. If you compare the United Kingdom authors to the US authors, what's the big difference?
I'll give you the answer my agent, Julia Lord, gave me. She's a New Yorker. Okay. She said, all the funny stuff comes from England. All the fantasy with a comic element. It's an over simplification. Of course, it isn't true. But a lot of English fantasy writers have a sort of strange, one can almost say the same tradition of Monty Python, a wit about them. And in fact, for a website here, I've written a piece about recommending 5 fantasy books that aren't afraid to be very funny. The first writer I mentioned is Robert Sheckley, who's from the golden age of the 1950s, and he was brilliantly funny, and Douglas also admired him very much. In fact, Douglas was once asked, "What's the difference between you and Robert Sheckley?" And he said, "Sheckley writes better," which is typical of Douglas's A, humor, and B, modesty. And the others I reckon were Douglas, Mervyn Peake, and Terry Pratchett. Now, I don't write like any of them. I don't write I just write like me. I wouldn't want to try to write like someone else. But I've come from a comedy writing background, and I can't help the fact that there are comic situations arrive often in the middle of desperate problems. I mean, comedy itself is not nice people telling jokes. That's a dinner party. Comedy is pain and fear and misery and things going horribly wrong and disasters and misunderstandings and people getting wet and slapstick and what good adventure isn't full of those? So it's a natural fit for me.
Are you changing your genre from comedy to fantasy novel?
Yes, I am. I'm not going to write anything for the rest of my life except the New Rock series. I was lucky enough that I've tried to write novels before, and I've always written the sort of novels I didn't want to read and read the sort of novels I didn't want to write. I couldn't figure out quite where I fitted. And then I've sort of come back to my first love, which is fantasy. Having realized, I studied English at Oxford University. I was at the same college that J.R.R. Tolkien was at as a student, and then later Philip Pullman. So it has quite a tradition of, there must be something in the water there. But the first major work in our language is Beowulf, which is a fantasy. It has a dragon. It has a monster that lives at the bottom of the lake and tears people's arms off. No, that's the hero tears. But that's our blood, more than right from the beginning. And the Greek myths, the metamorphoses, people turning into different animals and shapes and bodies, pure fantasy. And that's where I realized that I belong. And I've never felt so comfortable in my work as writing these. I'm not saying it's always easy. Sometimes you're struggling and getting lost and throwing things away and backing up and pushing, as we say in the bluegrass world. But it's just a great, and I do love a challenge. It's a great challenge to take on. And having completed 4 books in the series now, and sort of brought the main story to a satisfactory conclusion, from which, of course, other stories can come, I feel that I've really found my space.
But as a comedian writer, is it I can see from your fantasy novel?
It's the other way around, really. I've brought my comedic sensibilities, such as they are, to the world of adventure, which, I mean, if you like, I can tell you how it all came about, completely out of the blue. If you'd told me 5 years ago that I would ever attempt to write another book again, I would say, well, that ship's sailed. I've tried. I never found my groove. And then one summer day, 4 years ago, this idea just fell out of the sky and hit me on the head. And the idea basically is, what would I love role-playing games, on the big ones on the internet, playing with other people. What would it be like to actually be in a world like that? Not in a game. I'm not doing go into a game story. And then it just hit me. These our hero and his 2 teammates win the world championship of sword and sorcery. And the next thing you know, he's whizzed off through a maelstrom of special effects and finds himself all alone in the middle of nowhere with just a crappy noob level sword and shield and terrible gear, and there are wolves chasing him. What would you do? And that's where it starts.
Yes.
The first thing to do is see if they can find each other. Are the other guys there? His teammates are an Australian player whose avatar is a heavily armed orc wielding a battle axe, and a sword dancer who's an an Asian American girl who's moves like the wind and hits like a hurricane. And they're a great fit in real life. And he would love to find them so they might survive. And it's all explained at the end of the first book, what happened and why. Meanwhile, they have a massive amount of problems to deal with, and as a quest emerges. And of course, the first thing in any game you learn is to orientate yourself to the world, how to train. So the first thing is everything gets worse, and then they have a sequence where they learn basic skills. He's sold into the army as a slave and trains under the fearsome Sergeant Jack Blunt, who's known to one and all as Sergeant Bastard. And they get good, and then they're marched off to war, and that's really where the main quest begins.
Do you think Nurul will be the next Harry Potter?
I mean, I'd love to do for Kasich what J.K. Rowling did for Bloomsbury. That was a tiny little imprint when they took her on, and now look at them. That would be that would be fantastic. But no, it's not the same. It's not YA fiction. It's it's for everybody. It's for adults. Although a kid at the end of our street in London is absolutely agog to get an advanced reader copy. I promised him one. He reads 3 books a week, and he's only 13. I said to his mum, there are 1 or 2 rude words in it, but there's no there's no nastiness. There's combat, of course, but it's not a gore fest. I don't do atrocity pornography like some fantasy writers get deeply into things being unpleasant in battle. I mean, come judge for yourself. But he's looking forward to reading it, and all my test readers, one is in her 70s, the others anything but 30 and up, and they've put their book reports on my web, and they were really helpful with writing the 4 books. And then I got the great Leslie Robin as my editor, and editing. I've done a ton of script editing in my time, and editing is where you get the gold. And she was brilliantly insightful. So if the 2 of us can come up with something that does well, I'll be delighted. But we're not going to be the next Harry Potter, although I have sold the film rights and written the script, so we'll see.
Before we go, and I want to shout out to the people listening in Malaysia, truly. Asia, in Kuala Lumpur, I get 42% audience share. Selangor at 27%. Perak at 8%. Sarawak at 8%. Penang at 8%. And Johor at 4%. And last but not the least, Sabah at 4%. Thank you, Malaysia, for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Richard Sparks. Mr. Richard, Nurul, is this a series, a quartet, or trilogy?
It's, well, a quartet, I suppose, a tetralogy, if one's going to do it in Greek, but it's going to continue. It basically is what happens next. I mean, the first quest is completed. The explanation is discovered as to why this happened to them, why they're in this new world, why they're their own avatars instead of being the players they were behind them, and what was at stake in addition to their own lives. It's not a game. There's no reloading. Dead would mean dead if they got deadified. And then the next thing, well, what happens next? You finish one task in life, and there's another one ends up. So the next book, they have another whole bunch of things that are confronting them.
Interesting. Nurul, how did you craft it?
Well, the second book's called New Rock, New Realm. The third is New Rock, New Rules. New Rock, New Rules, and it's got a wonderfully unpleasant villain in it, a real entitled jackass. I mean, someone you just say, he's so powerful. He's got this massive army of, all sorts of things, and there's against this tiny little kingdom which they've helped rescue. And the rule of in a lot of adventure writing, especially fantasy, is that the villains must be far more powerful than the heroes, and the odds must be overwhelming. So it's a lot of fun solving that. And during the time that they're going through the stories, all these puzzles emerge, which you must wrangle with yourself just as the hero has to. He's the kind of puzzle guy in the team, so everyone expects him to solve these, and they seem to make absolutely no sense to him until he's gets one foot in front of another and finds a little bit of the puzzle, and then gradually becomes clearer. And that's one of the nice things that happens in games, is you get puzzles, you get problems, you get challenges thrown your way, and you as the reader, the player, have to work them out.
How did you balance the heroes and the villain of your story?
Again, I started off by making the villain much more powerful than they are. In fact, at the beginning, everyone's more powerful than they are. The first thing that happens to our hero, whose avatar's name is Dax, Daxx, is that he levels down, as it were. If it was the game, you know, he's landed, he's being chased by wolves, he's chased up a tree, and the next thing he knows, he's captured by two wiry little woodskin archers who realize he's got no papers and capture him as an outlaw and so take him off to be sold as a slave, which is not a good start. And on the way, he meets Grell, who's also been captured. And Grell is, instead of being an apex level warrior, is this wimpy, useless, bloody orc who can't do anything. And the two of them are sold into the army of my Lord of Brigstow at the nearest big town. And they train and they get good. And then with a new companion, Ola, who's a little street rat thief, they go off to war, and the three of them manage to take the city that was looked impregnable, mainly due to Ola's thieving skills. And that's when the story really kicks in, the main quest.
Yes, I love the cover of your book. The first time I saw it, oh, I think this is the next Harry Potter.
Yeah, Daniel, from your mouth, a real shout out to, well, both Kasich and Christina Meervold. She is the artist. She's a Norwegian woman who lives in Glasgow, Scotland. So I'll get to meet her next summer because Worldcon is going to be there in Glasgow. And she is just brilliant. She does a lot of work for Marvel Studios and stuff like that now, but she always has a time for Kasich's commissions because they have a relationship going back. And I've just sent her the brief for the cover for the second book for New Rock, New Realm. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what she comes up with for that, because her first cover is just sets the whole thing up. It says, this looks, wow, what that? This looks like terrifying but fun.
Awesome, yeah. Shout out to the people listening in Norway. I have a lot of places in Norway listening to this podcast. Thank you so much, Mr. Richard Nurak Nurol. What behind the title of your first quartet?
Well, role-playing games, ROLE. I was playing a lot of role-playing games online, mainly sword and sorcery ones, some space ones I loved. And I just was completely blown away by these wonderful worlds that the developers and artists create for us. In the end, I realized that there are only two quests. Well, every gamer knows this when you've done a few games, is go and kill something or go and fetch something, which is we call kill or FedEx. So coming up with writing my own books that grew out of that genre, I'm writing my own what the F is the quest. The guy's going around, well, not only do we have to do that and maybe go there and maybe kill this, but what are we doing? What is it all about? So it's got the conventions of novel writing in that it's a narrative that goes through from time to time and develops episodically and in a linear way, in an organic way. But it's also got this idea of quests, and it's got that extra element that games don't have, because although in a great computer game, you're the hero of your own adventure, you can go wherever you like, it's limited by what the writers have already written. And reading my book is not limited by anything that you're bringing to it. You're going, okay, this is a novel. Tell me what's happening. Show me what's unfolding. And so it's slightly wider range than a computer game has in terms of narrative.
Very well said, Mr. Richard. But before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chefs in one of the best restaurants in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about cannelloni, people, one of, let's say, trademark of Italian cuisine. So please do listen. Food 101 plus one more. Our books are out. Not only one, but 7 volumes, people. Volume 1 is all about the basics that you need to create a delicious food. It's all about food, 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 people. So please do grab a copy. Available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Richard, let's talk about the Writers Guild America strike.
I'm Writers Guild of Great Britain, so I'm not a member of the WGA, and therefore I've been watching it with great concern, because this is a very successful business that's actually being killed by a different business model coming in and not understanding what it's doing. I heard from someone on the inside what the main problem is. It's to do with residuals, people not getting paid as well as they used to when they would write a TV show years ago. They got paid residuals when it's repeated. Those have been taken away by the new models of like streaming and so on. And I said, well, look, the obvious answer to this is you find out what a show has gathered in terms of audience. So if 5 million people watch it, the cast and crew and talent share in a small pool. But if 500 million people watch it and streams, surely there's a bigger pool of money to go around and pay it out. That's when the money comes in, it should be shared out. And the answer is,
Yes.
well, unfortunately, that makes complete sense. We've all been saying exactly that. But the tech bros who now own the business won't give away their data. That's their mantra. They just refuse to even contemplate sharing their data. So those on their colleagues on the other side of the desk, the actors and directors and writers and so on, aren't given the information from which they can ask for a fair slice of the pie. So it's a real impasse. I'm worried about it.
If you compare the British Writers Guild to the American, what are the big difference?
I honestly, I'm not really qualified to do that. My former writing partner, Gail Renard, was head of the Writers Guild of Great Britain twice, and so she knows all about it. I suggest you might want to interview her when she's got a great book coming out in a year or so.
Definitely.
Very, very funny stories about her life, and Douglas Adams, the Monty Pythons, John Lennon, who she was a friend of. So interview her and ask her that.
Oh yes, I love it. New role. This is good for a series or a motion picture.
Well, yeah, I was thinking when I'd finished it, I thought, this might sell for the TV. But my producer in England said the streaming world has rather changed and people actually want 2-hour adventure films rather than some enormous series they wallow in. We all love to get a good binge watch going, but there's more to the audience out there than that. So he said, see if you can write it as a script. And I thought there's far too much in the book. I mean, it's 160,000 words. How am I going to get that into 2 hours? So, but I've done a lot of editing and adapting. It's where I started, was adapting books for TV. So I sort of experienced at it, and I got the script down to 119 pages, which is 2 hours. And now we've got another writer we've brought in to help me to basically to be an editor who loves the book, and he's taking a look at the script. And he's a very experienced fantasy writer with a big name in the world. And he and I will knock it into shape. It's in perfectly good shape at the moment, but there's always the next step. Anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about it already, just go to richardsparks.com. That's Sparks without an E in it. And there's quite a lot of stuff up there about it. You can sign up for the various newsletters and stuff that we're going to be starting. This is an introduction to the story so far. Millions of people watch live online as I lead my crew in the grand finals of the World Championship of Sword and Sorcery. In real life, I'm a retired teacher and hardcore gamer, but in-game, my avatar is Daxx, a heroic young battle mage. My teammates are Grell, a battle axe-wielding, heavily armoured orc warrior, the avatar of an Australian player, and Krystal, a lightning-fast, twin-bladed sword dancer, the avatar of an Asian American girl. We win the title, the crowd goes crazy. Grell, I, and Krystal are congratulating each other, And the next thing I know, I'm hurtling off and away in a maelstrom of chaos, which dumps me by myself in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. And I'm my own avatar, Daxx, for real. But instead of being an apex level battle mage, I'm armed only with a crappy sword and buckler and dressed in low level beginner gear. Not only that, wolves are howling nearby. It gets worse. I'm captured by little woodfolk bounty hunters who assume I'm an outlaw and therefore fair game. I'm sold into the ranks of an army, along with Grell. There is no sign yet of Krystal in this strange new world. After training under the fearsome Sergeant Blunt, known to one and all as Sergeant Bastard, we are marched off to war. Thanks to our new friend and fellow recruit Ola, a former street rat thief, we capture the town of Rushton, where, to our surprise, we are summoned to a private audience with Lord Rushton. Okay, so going back to the beginning. So this is the middle of where it all starts. Where in all hells have you been? Sergeant Bastard demanded as we were marched into the orderly room between 6 of his guards. We've been searching high and low for you, castle and barracks. I even had to send a search squad into town. That's where we were, Sergeant. Sorry, we were off duty, Sergeant. Oh, we didn't know you wanted us, Sergeant. We had time off, so we blurted over each other, and all at once, until Sergeant Bastard leapt to his feet, roaring, Time off? Time off? There's no time off in my lord's army. What do you think this is, a bleeding school picnic? No, Sergeant. Sorry, Sergeant. What do you want to see us about, Sergeant? We mumbled in reply, chastened. Blunt glared at us and slowly sat back down. Well, you wasn't to know, I suppose. Came out of the blue to me, so... He shook his head. How is you miserable lot to know his lordship of Rushton wants to see you right away, if you please, in his lordship's inner sanctum? Off you go now and look smart about it. It don't look good to keep his lordship waiting, and it don't reflect well on me. So be off with you. At the double. 1, 2, 1, 2. We saluted, about turned, and ran. What's an inner sanctum? Grell asked as we hurried from the castle barracks to the residential quarters. Dunno, I said, and neither did Ola. But Steward Him.Thus did when we found him at his table in my lord's counting house. He worked all day and night, did Steward Him.Thus. Rumour was he even slept in the counting house. He led us along a dark panelled corridor with rich carpets on the floor and portraits of haughty-looking Rushton's ancestors on the walls sneering down at us. He knocked on the door at the end of it and stood aside when my lord of Rushton's harsh, supercilious voice from within rasped out, Send them in. Yes, my lord, Him.Thus said with his usual obsequiousness. He held the door for us, and we stepped in nervously. A figure was seated in the chair beyond my lord of Rushton's large, ornate desk. The chair was facing the other way. All we could see of it was its high, carved back. Shut the door and leave, Him.Thus, the voice growled, deep and rough. My lord of Rushton clearly had a nasty throat that evening. I hoped I wouldn't catch what he had brought it on. And no listening at the door. At once, my lord. Certainly not, my lord. The door closed behind us. Draw the curtains, my lord of Rushton ordered. Behind you. I turned and found the thick, heavy drapes, which I drew across the door. Nosy buggers always listening at keyholes, hence the curtains. My lord of Rushton's voice was somehow higher and less raspy than it had been. My lord of Rushton's voice was somehow higher and less raspy than it had been as he rose from his chair and turned to face us, the reason for which was that the figure sitting on it was not my lord of Rushton, but his daughter, Esmeralda. Took you long enough, she snapped. And in her own voice, it was the sweetest, most delightful snap you could ever possibly hear. Silly grins came to our faces, and we simpered. Don't do that, Esmeralda ordered. Do what? I said, smiling dreamily. Simper. I hate simpering. And wipe those stupid grins off your faces. You look like sheep that have eaten idiot grass. I laughed, as did Grell and Ola. Is that a thing? I said. Idiot grass? Or did you just make it up? I hope it's a thing. I'd like to try some. It sounds delightful. If not, it's the cleverest joke I've ever heard. Oh, for the love of Limnia, Esmeralda groaned. She had come around the desk now and strode towards us. Goddess of patience and forbearance, give me strength. She stared at us, her lips pursed. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to control her temper. She began again. You're here to do a job, a hard, horrible, dangerous job, which nobody must know about, ever, under any circumstances. And I picked you because you're hard, horrible, dangerous characters. Everyone knows what you did on the night of the raid, you and that skirt-mad alchemist. And you stand there simpering and tittering like half-drunk chickens. Tee-hee-hee, I agreed, thinking of chickens simpering, and Grell being compared to one, and how funny and charming she was, while Grell gurgled and Ola chuckled. She waited for us to stop. We eventually subsided and stood there gazing at her adoringly. She stared back stonily. Turn round, she said at last. We turned. Okay, you can look now, she said, her voice slightly muffled. When we turned back, she was wearing a bag over her head. It was as if the light had gone out of the room and taken the unicorns and pixies and flowers with it, and the bunny rabbits had scuttled back into their little holes. No, we said, please take that off. There's no need. Do you know how annoying, she interrupted from within her bag, it is to have to carry this stupid thing around me everywhere if I want to get anything actually done? We did not. If we wanted to get anything done, we had to do it ourselves. But then we weren't nobility. Inside this bag, it's hot and stuffy, and I can't see your faces to see what you're thinking. It's much easier to lie to someone with a bag over their head than to someone who can read you like a wide open book. So don't make me do this again. She took the bag off, and as she stuffed it back into the pocket of her smock, the sun came out again. The unicorns and rainbows danced around her once more. The bunny rabbits emerged from their little holes, and this is serious, she said. I need you to take me seriously. For all the God's sakes. At the moment, inside, I looked like him. She pointed at Grell, then held her arms up at him like claws above her head and gave a scary, attacking roar. It was the loveliest scary roar you could ever hear. Oh, we murmured. Ah, she howled. I don't look like that, Grell said, grinning at her wistfully. Wish I did. Oh, so the big scary orc wants to be a girl, does he? Esmeralda taunted. No, Grell said quickly. I meant... He swallowed and finished lamely. Nice. Esmeralda glared at him, breathing hard. Her glare faded and she sighed. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. It's the fault of that fairy fucking godmother, excuse the technical terminology. What fairy godmother? I asked. I'll tell you later, if you agree to help me. Please? Her lips were trembling. I've got no one else to turn to. You're my only hope. Anything, I said. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. Well, you're soldiers. I thought I had to act. Tears were running down her cheeks. We were all handkerchiefs and concern, and there, and of course we'll help, and just tell us what you need us to do, while our hearts broke for her. She wiped her eyes with my handkerchief. She'd chosen my handkerchief, then blew her perfect nose with exquisite grace into it and handed it back. I put it away quickly in a buttoned inside pocket, which even Ola wouldn't be able to pick. I wasn't going to wash that handkerchief ever. I was going to keep it always, have it framed and hung above my mirror where I could gaze at it. No, I'd wear it in my helmet as her favour, in a tourney, which I'd win because I had her favour, which meant that she loved me, and we'd get married and ride off to our castle, me on a white steed and her on a dappled palfrey, with the unicorns and pixies and rainbows and bunny rabbits, ooh, and some little Tweety birds too. I've never done anything like this before, Esmeralda said, breaking into my reverie. I'm scared, but I know I have to, and I don't trust anyone else in this town. They'll just shop me to Daddy, and I'll be grounded. And when I saw you at the feast and heard what you'd done and how brave you were, I thought Limnia had heard my prayers. I can't go alone. It wouldn't be safe. Go where? I said. Mayport, we knew, was the capital city, which lay many long leagues to the south. Them roads aren't safe at the best of times, Ola agreed. Bandits, outlaws, wolves, bears, and so on. And this ain't the best of times, what with the wars and such. And patrols, Esmeralda said. They'll be out looking for me as soon as they saw I was gone. I'll pay you, of course, 100 gold each. We wouldn't earn that much money in 20 years in my Lord of Brigstow's army, no matter how high we rose through the ranks. Deserting sounded a lot more lucrative than soldiering. Grell said, why do you need to go to Mayport? To find her. Find who? My fairy godmother. None of us knew what to say to that. She came to me in a dream on my 16th birthday, and in all my dreams since. She's in the King's City, she says, and Mayport's where the king lives. I have to go to her, and I must hurry. I have something for her, she says, and she has something for me. I said, did you say what that is? Esmeralda shook her head. No, just that the fate of the realm depends on it. She sounded and looked miserable as she said it. Silence fell in his lordship's inner sanctum. I glanced at the others. Well, I'm in, Ola said. 100 of gold, or sitting on my arse in barracks all day? Too right, Grell said. And what were we saying earlier, eh? Dull as hell, a peacetime army. Esmeralda's slumped shoulders straightened, and she looked at us, almost in disbelief. You will? I said, we will. Oh, thank you, thank you. She hugged us each in turn. I'm sorry I was rude earlier. I just thought, well, you'd be hard, horrible, dangerous characters, so I had to be horrible. Grell, a soppy grin on his face from Esmeralda's hug, said, I'm not horrible. She looked at him. I expect you can be if you want. Well, Grell admitted, yes, but I'd never be horrible to you. Just to anyone I told you to be horrible to. Yeah, just point them out. But I don't want you to think of me as horrible, that's all. Because I'm not, am I, Daxx? Not to those you like, I said. See, I like you, he said to Esmeralda, and I'd like you to like me, which you won't if you think I'm horrible. Esmeralda thought and nodded. I see your point, Grell, but what I happen to want is people who can be, not are, horrible. Oh, I can be, he agreed. I'm just not. He grinned at her happily. She smiled back, a lovely, radiant smile, and it was as if the sun had suddenly come out in that darkened room. I promise I won't tell anyone, Grell. It'll be our little secret. Right, here's the plan. We followed her to her father's desk, where she unrolled the map on it. It was large and detailed and showed the entire realm. We're here, she pointed at Rushton. Mayport lay way down on the south coast at the mouth of a long river, May River, much the largest river on the map. May River had its sources in a number of streams springing up in the western mountains, which all ran east in a long curve to the north of Rushton and Brigstow. It widened as they merged into each other, and then turned more or less south in a straight line, with the occasional long detour around hills, until it flowed into the sea at Mayport. Think you can find your way there? She asked. Piece of cake, Ola said. I'm good at finding. I studied the map. As I did, I traced the line of our journey so far. I could even work out vaguely where Grell and I had separately started. Pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together.
Wow. Interesting, Mr. Richard. Congratulations for your debut fantasy novel.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And
Mr. Richard, what is the chapter that you love the most?
Well, the funny thing is, Daniel, that because I've written 4 books already, which haven't been published yet, I've been able to go back into the first book to lay pipe, as we say in the script editing business, for payoffs later. Because, you know, story structure is all about setup and payoff. You put your breadcrumb trails, you do your red herrings, you do distractions. And sometimes I go back and say, if that's happening here, we can set something up in book 2 to foreshadow it. So I go back to book 2, find the spot you were thinking about, and then I find myself reading 10, 20, 30 pages. And oh, wow. Because I'm just really enjoy reading it. I kind of wish someone else had written these so I could, and there were 20 more of them. I just thoroughly so lucky to have this world to play in. It's been a joy.
Thank you, Listen Notes, for my latest score of 26 and belong to 10% popular show globally. Thank you, Listen Notes. And Mr. Richard, can you please invite our listeners to buy your debut novel, Nura Nural?
It would be wonderful if anyone were to wish to order a pre-sale copy. Advanced copies, I learnt, pre-sales count towards the first week's sales. So they're really important in getting a good start on the bestseller lists. So if you get a good bunch of people who sign up in the weeks before publication, that really counts. It gets you off to a good start. So you can go to richardsparks.com. You can go to the various, through the shop page, to various merchants where you can order it, such as Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Indie Books, other places. They're up there. You can go to kaezik.com, that's spelled CAEZIK.com, Arc Manor Books, for their shop page. Anywhere you buy your fiction, it'll be in bookstores on December the 12th, and pre-sales will be much enjoyed. They're also up there. There are sample chapters you can order. They're not ready yet, but if you order, you'll get a sample audio chapter, if you want one, or a sample PDF chapter. And when those are ready, which should be within the next few weeks, those will be sent to your inbox. The reason they're not ready yet is I'm still editing the audiobook with my producer, Fred Sanders, who, by the way, did the last Game of Thrones book with the wonderful Roy Dotrice reading. So we got to clean up and do the pickups on that. And the actual physical book is in the proofreading stage at the moment. So once it's all ready, you'll get your sample chapter if you care to order one, and it's free.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Richard Sparks, because if you support him, more books to come. It's a quartet, people. Let's support him. Richard, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
Take on, people. See you soon.